Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It's Leslie again, or if you prefer to introduce myself using my Muslim name, then I am Abdul Karim Abdullah, and in fact, most of my friends and former colleagues and Muslim acquaintances here in Malaysia know me under the Muslim name. However, my YouTube channel is under my legal name, and most of my published work is also under my legal name. So once again, welcome to another one of these videos. And the purpose of this video is to introduce my second last book that was published a few days ago on Amazon.com, and the title of the book is Islam in the Age of Unreason, and the subtitle is Analysis of Intellectual Suicide. Now, this term intellectual suicide, actually I borrowed from Fazlur Rahman, who uses this term to refer to what happened in the Muslim intellectual tradition when reason and rationality were, so to speak, sidelined and perhaps degraded in some way or marginalized. So now the book is basically a sort of overview of what happened and how it can be set right. As you know, in Muslim intellectual history, there were people like Muhammad Abdu and others who tried to revive a form of rationalism in Muslim intellectual discourse with mixed results. There was also a book written recently and a paper by Umar Chapra. The book was titled The Decline, I think, of the Muslim or Islamic Civilization, and the paper, I believe, was entitled Is Rationalism Possible in a Muslim World? I might add also in this regard that apparently Muhammad Asad's translation of the Quran was recently banned in Saudi Arabia, and the reason given for the ban was that it was a rationalist or a Mu'tazilite sort of translation of the Book of Allah. So now we should perhaps begin by noting that Al-Quran, the Book of Allah, that we Muslims consider to be the Word of God, places a strong emphasis on reason and rationalism. We very often read in the Book of Allah expressions like "Afala taqilun," will you not think? There's also an emphasis on tadabbur, meaning meditation, and tafakkur, a different expression to denote thinking. So Islam, in a way, is a thinking person's religion. I personally don't see any contradiction between using one's reason or one's mind and understanding and reading the Book of Allah. In fact, I would say that if we are to follow the Book of Allah, we first of all need to understand the Book of Allah. And to understand the Book of Allah, we need to use our reason or our faculty of comprehension. How else can you, understand the book if not by using your mind or your reason? And how can you follow anything unless you understand it? So I think following the Book of Allah requires the understanding it, which in turn requires using our mind to comprehend the message that Allah Ta'ala is getting across to us in that book. So reason is an indispensable tool of, you might say, exegesis or interpretation or understanding of the book. I just do not see how the book could be understood in any other way. Although there are people and have been people in the Muslim intellectual tradition, or should I say in Muslim tradition, who expressed reservations about the use of reason, and these reservations have in fact been recorded also allegedly in some of the traditions attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. And according to these traditions, the Prophet allegedly stated that the use of reason-based tafsir of the Quran is a form of kufr or disbelief. In other words, this suggestion in this tradition, allegedly, attributed to the Prophet, the message of this tradition is that we should not use our reason to form an opinion or to even attempt to understand the Book of Allah using our own intelligence, reason, or the mind. Now, I find this highly problematic for the reasons I mentioned already. Now, if we are not supposed to approach the Book of Allah through the rational faculty or through the mind, then how are we going to do it? And in fact, traditional Muslims or traditionists, as I sometimes refer to them, they have an answer. According to them, we need to approach the Book of Revelation, the Book of Allah, what Allah sent down, tanzil. We need to approach this text through tradition. In other words, through the understanding of the people that came before us. In other words, we are expected by traditional Muslims, or many, perhaps not all, to adopt a methodology of understanding the Quran that is also known as taqlid, or that's spelled Taqlid, or the unquestioning following of tradition, including the perceptions of the former scholars and the perceptions of the companions as they are recorded in the books of traditions, and also as these understandings are recorded in the traditional books of exegesis or the books of tafsir or interpretation, written by people like Ibn Kathir, Tabari, Qurtubi, and others. So reason or rationality was somehow looked down upon as somehow unreliable and even linked to or identified with following desire and whim. In fact, when I was writing a paper on critical thinking, I remember going to a library with a colleague, a former colleague of mine, whose Arabic at that time was better than my own, and we looked into Hans Wehr dictionary to look at the word hawa, because the word hawa is used in the Quran in the context of discouraging us from following our desires. The the Arabic expression is La tattabi'u ahwa'akum. Do not follow your desires. Now, some of the traditional ulama interpret this verse to mean that we should not follow our desires in the form of our opinions. In other words, these particular ulamas appear to have conflated the word desire or hawa with the word opinion. Now, when we looked into the dictionary, Hans Wehr dictionary, and looked up the meaning of the word hawa, I saw many meanings there, including desire, lust, whim, impulse, and what have you, but the word opinion was not among any of the connotations of the word hawa. So here I fear what has happened is that the traditional ulama have reinterpreted the meaning of hawa to mean capricious opinion, while in fact it only means caprice or whim or desire. So this was done perhaps with a good intention to, in their eyes, I mean, to discourage people from relying on their own understanding and instead to rely on other people's understanding or perhaps even misunderstanding, as the case may be, of the sacred book. In other words, the intention behind this, I don't know whether I should call it an innovation, but new, different interpretation of the meaning of hawa was to basically discourage people from relying on their own opinions or on their own views when it came to matters of religion, and this was to encourage people to follow the opinions rather or perceptions of the ulama, the scholars that were considered to be authoritative and well-founded. So this was actually the beginning of the split between the insistence on this methodology of understanding the Book of Allah was the beginning of a kind of split between two groups of Muslim scholars. The one group which I have just described were known as the traditionists or the Ahlul Hadith, who basically asserted that we need to understand the Book of Allah in the light of the Hadith. In other words, the presumption here was that the Hadith somehow explains the Quran better than Allah, although the Quran claims to the contrary that nobody basically explains better than Allah. And in fact, there's a statement by one of the Sahaba to the effect. But the Quran informs us that Allah explains the Quran, Allah clarifies the Quran, Allah elucidates the Quran, and the Quran is presented to us as a clear book that explains everything in detail, and a book that is without contradictions. In other words, the book is clear, complete, and coherent. You could think of it as 3 C's: clear, complete, and coherent. But some of the ulama are claiming, on the contrary, that no, there are some unclear passages in the Quran which require clarification by reference to tradition. They also claim that the hadith judge the Quran. This is, I suppose, part of the explanation or the elucidation of the Quran. They also claim that the hadith or the tradition supplies some allegedly missing details from the Quran, such as how many rakat to perform during prayer, or how many percent to pay for the zakat. These are supposedly found in the traditions rather than in the Book of Allah. And finally, to deal with the alleged problem of the incoherence or contradictoriness of some of the verses in the Quran, the ulama reached out and engaged the so-called doctrine of abrogation, according to which if there are two verses that appear to contradict themselves, to contradict each other, then the right way to resolve the contradiction, the alleged contradiction, is to consider the verse revealed previously to have been abrogated by the verse revealed subsequently. So all of these, assumptions about how to interpret the Book of Allah, to me, seem to rest on shaky foundations. In fact, they strike me as somehow less than reasonable, and in fact, they strike me as being in conflict with what the Quran teaches. So, how did this happen? To some extent, the book is an attempt to explain how this transpired, and as part of the analysis, it delves into the so-called struggle between this group, the Ahlul Hadith, with their competitors, who are sometimes known as the Ahlul al-Rai, the people of opinion, or the people of reason, or the rationalists. The leading proponent of the rationalists would be Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Hanifa, while the leading proponent of the traditionist school of thought would be Imam al-Shafi. So now there was this debate, struggle, or clash, if you prefer, conflict, or somehow disagreement, struggles between these two schools of thought, and the struggle was, as you can gather, about what is the best way, the right way, the preferred way to approach and to understand the Quran. I might add, in conclusion, that the Ahlul al-Rai included not only the Mu'tazilites, who were known as the rationalists, but also, according to a book by Daniel Brown called Rethinking Tradition in Modern Islamic Thought, he claims that the Ahlul al-Rai also included the people known as the Mutakallimun, or the Ahlul Kalam. Now, to the extent that the Ahlul Kalam, some of them rejected all the hadiths, and some would accept some hadiths. Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, would only accept, according to Daniel Brown, hadiths which were verbatim records of what the Prophet allegedly said. In other words, he would not accept any hadith that was transmitted merely in paraphrase, and this actually applies to the vast majority of the hadiths. Now, some of the Ahlul Kalam rejected hadiths completely and relied on the Quran alone, and perhaps they could be perceived as the Ahlul Quran for that very reason. So my question to the viewers is, was the conflict between the so-called Ahlul al-Rai and the Ahlul Hadith more like a conflict between the Ahlul Quran and the Ahlul Hadith than a kind of tension between the Ahlul al-Rai and the Ahlul Hadith? What do you think? I welcome your comments below. Thank you very much, and that's all for now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.